She was just an old woman in a tattered dress. They said she didn't belong, but when the four-star general saw her, everything stopped. They called her Miss Hattie Mae Johnson, 82 years old, with silver curls tucked neatly under a church hat and hands that still trembled when she played the piano, not from weakness but from the weight of all they had touched. She lived alone in a small, time-worn house in Macon, Georgia, the kind with creaky floors and plastic on the couch. A cross hung above the front door, and the scent of cornbread and eucalyptus drifted softly through the air, as if time itself was slower in her presence. Hattie Mae wasn't famous. She didn't hold degrees or own much more than the photos on her mantle. But to the folks in her neighborhood, she was a pillar, a soft-spoken soul who knew how to calm a crying baby, knead biscuits with love, and play Amazing Grace like it was being heard for the first time. She was there during the marches, not with fists in the air, but with cool water for the marchers and a spare bed for those who had nowhere else to go. Hattie never needed the spotlight. She just wanted people to get home safe, but her own son Iggy never did. His name was Elijah, barely 19 when he left for Vietnam. He wore his uniform like armor, with his mother's prayers tucked inside every pocket. He wrote letters home full of dreams, full of fear. Then one day, the letters stopped. The telegram came on a Monday. After that, Hattie didn't speak much for weeks. She just played the piano in church, hymn after hymn, letting the sorrow drip from her fingers onto the keys. She never remarried, never had another child. But somehow she became a mother to half the neighborhood. Kids would show up at her door hungry, barefoot, needing someone to listen, and she always did. She gave them more than food. She gave them safety, wisdom, peace. In her younger years, Hattie had worked as a housemaid. She'd scrubbed floors in homes that barely acknowledged her presence, and later found quiet work cleaning offices at a nearby military base. She wore a faded uniform, carried a mop bucket, and smiled politely as she passed young recruits. Most never looked her in the eye. But one day, a new boy arrived, tall, pale, and jittery. Private Michael Whitaker. He was from somewhere in Kentucky, with a drawl thicker than sweet tea and hands that trembled when he tried to hold a tray in the mess hall. He was lost. Everyone could see it. But Hattie saw something else. She noticed how he lingered after meals, just to hear her hum gospel tunes while she wiped tables. She saw how he flinched at loud voices, how he winced when others joked too hard, and so she made a decision. She packed an extra plate of food on Sundays, left it outside his bunk without a word. The next week, she left 2 biscuits and a note. That simply said, "You're not alone." Weeks turned into months. She started calling him baby. He called her Mama Hattie. She never asked what he'd been through. She just listened. And slowly, he started to become steady. He wrote her letters after he was deployed, came by to visit when he got promoted, and every time he walked through her door, he left his medals on the kitchen table like they were nothing, because to him, she was the real hero. Years went by. Ranks rose, life happened. But Michael never forgot her, and neither did she. Hattie Mae didn't have much, but she gave what she had: warmth, wisdom, and a kind of love that didn't ask for anything in return. Michael Whitaker had arrived, at the base like a ghost of a boy, shoulders hunched, eyes darting, carrying more pain than his young face could hide. He was only 19, but his spirit felt older. Too many nights sleeping in the back of a truck, too many bruises that weren't from training, too many years of silence in a home where nobody said, "I love you." And somehow, Hattie Mae saw all of that. Without him saying a word, she fed him, not just food, but kindness. Fried chicken, greens, and cornbread on Sundays. Advice wrapped in stories about her own life. She'd tell him, "Baby, the world is hard, boo, but don't you let it turn you cold. Or when they treat you like dirt, you grow roots. You hear me? Roots." She taught him how to tie a proper tie, how to pray when fear made your hands shake, how to forgive people who never apologized, not for them, but for your own peace. When she played piano at the chapel, Michael would sit in the back pew, listening to the melodies she poured from her soul. And afterward, she'd hand him a folded handkerchief and whisper, Don't cry in front of them, boys, but cry here if you need to. Ain't no shame in softness. Over time, the base changed. Young men came and went, but Michael stayed longer. Got promoted, became a junior officer, then a captain, then a major, and through it all he wrote Hattie, called her when he could, visited when he passed through Georgia. Every card signed, "Love always your son in spirit, Michael." He even sent money when she had a hip replacement, though she refused to cash the check. "He needs that more than me," she said, smiling through pain. "He's out there saving the world." Years passed. Michael became a 4-star general, a living legend, decorated with stars and medals. His photo hung in the Pentagon, his name, spoken in DC boardrooms, his words carried weight across nations. Presidents shook his hand. News anchors praised his strategy. Young soldiers looked at him the way he once looked at Hattie May, with reverence. But Hattie, she never cared about any of that. To her, he was still the skinny, quiet boy who flinched at slamming doors and asked her if she'd be proud if he made it. And she was, even as the years carved lines into her hands, even as her knees failed, and her memory sometimes wandered, even as she moved into an assisted living facility outside Macon, where no one knew who she used to be or who she still was in the heart of a general. Her room was small, her belongings fewer, but on her nightstand sat an old photo. Michael in uniform, arm wrapped around her shoulders, both of them grinning like mother and son. She watched him from afar. News clips, magazine features, the occasional military parade. She'd pat the screen gently and whisper, "You did good, baby." Then came the headline, "General Michael Whitaker dies at 68, national funeral planned at Arlington." The anchor spoke his name with solemnity. The screen showed rows of saluting soldiers, dignitaries scheduled to attend, a military procession unlike any other. Hattie's eyes welled with tears. She sat there in her floral housecoat, trembling. Not from shock, but from the ache that came when someone too precious to lose was gone. She pressed her hand to the photo on her nightstand and whispered, "You didn't tell me you were sick." The nurses offered condolences, but none of them knew what that man had meant to her. Not really. To them, she was just an old lady watching the news, but in her heart, she had to go. It didn't matter that she didn't get an invitation. It didn't matter that she couldn't remember the names of half the politicians they said would be there. What mattered was that her boy, her Michael, was being buried, and family says goodbye. She tried to call, tried to ask the home staff for help, but the process was rigid, formal. "It's a state funeral, Miss Hattie," they told her. "You need clearance. You need to be listed." Listed? What list included a woman who once held his head when he cried, who fed him when he was broke and hopeless, who taught him the value of gentleness in a cruel world? What list had a space for that? So Hattie May did the only thing she knew how to do. She showed up. She packed the same black dress she'd worn to her sister's funeral years ago, slipped her feet into the softest shoes she owned, though the soles had worn thin, pinned a tiny gold cross to her collar, and tucked Michael's last letter in her purse, the one where he wrote, "You gave me faith, I never forgot you." The assisted living driver offered to take her as far as Arlington's gate. That was the deal. "It's as far as I can." "Go," he said gently. "They've got heavy security." She nodded, didn't complain, just clutched her purse, took her cane and stepped out slowly, each step echoing the weight of love, memory and mourning. When she got to the gate, a sharp-dressed military officer stopped her. "Ma'am, this area's restricted. You need clearance?" "I'm here for Michael Whitaker," she said, voice cracking. "He called me Mama Hattie. I raised him in a way. I need to be there." The officer frowned, looked her over, old, frail, clearly not on any official list. Another guard joined him. Whispers passed between them. One even chuckled softly. "I'm sorry, Ma'am," he said flatly. "Family only." She blinked. "Family only." She nodded, slowly, stepped back. And as the gates loomed behind her and the sound of bagpipes began to play in the distance, Hattie May turned away, her heart breaking silently in two. It was the kind of funeral the whole country watched, Rows of flags lined the roads leading into Arlington National Cemetery. Marines in crisp dress blues stood at attention. Military helicopters circled overhead, broadcasting to news outlets across the nation. A silver casket, draped in the American flag, waited beneath a white canopy framed by saluting soldiers and 1,000 mourners dressed in black. Generals, senators, diplomats, even a former president. They all came to honor General Michael Whitaker. But outside those gleaming gates stood one woman alone, Hattie Mae Johnson, 82 years old, dressed in a faded overcoat and a wide-brimmed black hat from another era. Her shoes were scuffed, soles thin from wear. In her hands she clutched a worn leather purse, the same one she'd carried for decades. Inside it, Michael's final letter, folded neatly beside a travel-size bottle of lotion and a handkerchief embroidered with the letter E. For Elijah, her son. She'd taken a cab as far as the driver could go, then shuffled the final few feet to the security checkpoint. People passed her without a second glance, assuming maybe she was lost or confused. Some even quickened their pace to avoid being delayed, but she didn't waver. She stepped up to the gate slowly, carefully, the steel glinting in the late morning sun. 2 young military police officers watched her approach. One of them, barely, older than Michael had been when they first met, held out a firm hand. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to stop right there." Hattie did. "I'm here for the funeral," she said softly, her voice weathered but polite. "General Michael Whitaker. I raised that boy like my own." The younger officer squinted, trying to make sense of her. "Are you on the guest list?" he asked. She shook her head. "No, baby, I didn't get no invitation, but I need to be here. He was family to me, I just want to say goodbye." The other guard, a woman with a clipboard and radio, stepped forward. "I'm sorry, ma'am. This is a private, high-security event. Entry is restricted to immediate family, high-ranking officials, and approved guests. I don't see your name here." "I don't expect you to," Hattie said gently. "But you ask him. If he was still here, he'd tell you who I am." The guards looked at each other. The young man exhaled through his nose, then reached. "For his radio, ma'am," he said a bit more firmly this time. "I'm going to have to ask you to step away from the gate." Hattie didn't move. She looked through the iron bars. She could see the white tent, the chairs, the polished casket, the folded flags, all of it so close, and yet unreachable. "I was the one who made him sweet tea on Sundays," she said, her voice beginning to crack. "He used to cry in my kitchen and ask me if he mattered in this world. I told him he did. And look at him now. Y'all don't know what that boy came from. But I do. I do." There was silence. Cars continued to arrive in the distance. The crowd inside was taking their seats. The ceremony would start any minute. But outside the gate, this woman in her old coat, with the wind tugging gently at the hem, refused to leave. The female guard cleared her throat. "Ma'am, please, don't make this harder than it needs to be." And that was when Hattie's eyes welled up, not with rage, not with defiance, but with quiet, aching sorrow. "I don't want nothing fancy," she whispered. "I just want to stand there for 1 minute. Let him know I made it, that I came, that I loved him like he was mine." She looked at the young guard then, as if searching for something behind his neatly pressed uniform and polished badge. "I buried my real son 40 years ago. The military gave me a flag and a folded letter, and I folded my soul up right with it. But Michael, he made me feel like a mother again." The young soldier hesitated, his jaw clenched. For a second his fingers hovered near the gate switch, but the radio on his belt crackled. "Security check at the south gate. Stand by. Repeat. Hold perimeter. VIP movement incoming." He stepped, back flustered, and the moment passed. The gate remained closed. Hattie slowly turned away, her shoulders slumping, not from age but from heartbreak. As the wind swept past her, she pulled her coat tighter and took one step, then another, her cane tapping softly on the pavement. She didn't cry. Not yet. But inside her chest it felt like her heart had been left behind those gates. Next. To the man she once called son, and who the world now remembered. Without remembering her, as Hattie turned to leave, slow, quiet, invisible, one of the younger guards let out a low chuckle behind her. Probably just some local trying to get on TV, he muttered. The other shook his head, lips twitching, with the hint of a smirk. Every big event brings out the drama, he said, then waved at a military aide nearby. We've got a situation. Can we get her cleared out of the walkway? The aide, tall, expressionless, and clearly annoyed, strode over. Without even a glance in Hattie's direction, he reached for the handles of the wheelchair someone had offered her moments earlier. We'll find you a bench in the shade, ma'am, he said flatly, like she was a nuisance. He turned the chair around roughly, causing her purse to nearly slide from her lap. The handkerchief peeked out. Michael's letter fluttered slightly from where she'd tucked it, the only proof she had that she belonged. She clutched it tight. From the inside of the gate, a few attendees in dark suits noticed the commotion. They glanced over, frowning faintly, but turned their backs just as quickly. One woman whispered to another, "Who is she?" A man nearby pulled out his phone, starting to film. Another murmured, "Must be someone confused or crazy." None of them saw her. They saw an interruption, a delay, a problem in soft shoes. Hattie's eyes welled again, but this time she didn't plead. She just sat still, quiet, her lip trembling, her soul aching, until a screech, tires. A black SUV pulled up fast to the gate, its lights flashing, its presence commanding. The guards stiffened instantly. The aide stopped mid-motion, the back door flung open, and out stepped a tall man in full dress uniform, rows of medals on his chest, stars on his shoulders, presence as heavy as thunder. He moved with urgency, eyes locked on the scene at the gate, his face tight, his stride determined. One of the guards blinked. "Sir," but the man didn't answer. He walked straight toward the old woman in the wheelchair and dropped to his knees, not in formality, in reverence. He took her trembling hands into his own and whispered loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear, "This is Mama Hattie." Silence fell like a blanket across the gate. All movement froze. The phones lowered. The aide stepped back. The man's voice cracked with emotion. "She raised the greatest man I ever knew. If you won't let her in." He turned toward, the guard's eyes burning. "Then this whole ceremony stops right here." And for the first time that day, everyone looked at Hattie Mae Johnson, not as an old woman, but as the mother of the man they had all come to honor. The man kneeling before her, towering in rank, spotless in uniform, looked nothing like the awkward boy she once fed cornbread and collard greens on lonely Sunday afternoons. But in his eyes there was something familiar, something Michael must have seen too. He gently placed a hand over hers. "Ma'am, are you Hattie Mae Johnson?" Her voice barely rose above the hush around them. "Yes, sir. I am." The man took a breath, his voice trembling with something deeper than duty. "He told me all about you. Said you were the reason he made it through his first deployment. That your kitchen was the first place he ever felt safe. The first time anyone ever told him he mattered." Gasps rippled through the nearby crowd. Phones lowered, brows furrowed. The man stood tall now, chest rising with the weight of the moment. He turned to the gathering of officers, dignitaries, press, and strangers dressed in black. "I am General Marcus Riley," he declared, "and I would not be standing here if it weren't for General Whitaker, and he would not have made it through his first year in service without this woman right here." He paused, then added firmly, "This woman has more right to be here than anyone. She is family." The wind went still. Every soldier within earshot snapped to attention. The press, sensing history in real time, turned their cameras. Reporters whispered into microphones. Attendees shifted in their seats, craning to see the woman who had just become the heartbeat of the ceremony. Riley offered his arm. "May I escort you, ma'am?" Hattie hesitated, just for a second, then placed her hand gently in the crook of his elbow. With surprising strength she stood, shoulders back, chin high, a tear streaked silently down her cheek. He walked her slowly, reverently, through the now silent crowd. Guards who had mocked her moments before stepped aside, eyes lowered. Even the aide who'd tried to move her looked down in shame. As they reached the front row, the guests stood. All of them. In respect. In awe. Michael Whitaker's mother, Wanjin Maf, pale, frail woman dressed in black lace rose shakily to her feet. She reached out a gloved hand to Hattie. "I know who you are," she said, voice trembling. "Michael called you his second mama. He said you saved him." Hattie nodded gently, blinking back tears. "I tried my best," she whispered. And then, with the eyes of the nation watching, they sat side by side, two mothers, one by blood, one by love. And in that moment, beneath the solemn folds of the American flag, Hattie Mae Johnson was no longer invisible. She was seen. She was heard. And finally, she was home. The ceremony continued beneath a sky so still, it felt like even the heavens were listening. General Whitaker's casket lay before a nation in mourning. Taps echoed softly across the hills. Flags stirred gently in the breeze. But it was the words of the chaplain that etched themselves into every heart present that day. He stood before the crowd, voice steady, hands clasped behind his back. "General Michael Whitaker," he began, "was a soldier, a leader, a hero. But before he wore those stars, before the medals and the parades, he was a scared, lonely young man." He paused, eyes scanning the rows of mourners, and landing just for a moment on Hattie. There was a woman who took him in when he had nothing, no direction, no confidence, no family to speak of. She didn't share his blood, but she gave him something even deeper. He smiled softly, voice thick with reverence. She was his anchor, his safe place, his second mother. Her name is Mrs. Hattie Mae Johnson, and though she wasn't kin by blood, she was kin by soul. Whispers stirred among the guests, of recognition, of respect. Hattie lowered her head, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. But this time, they weren't for being unseen, they were for being remembered. When the final prayer was spoken and the 21-gun salute faded into silence, a young soldier, no older than Michael had been when he met her, approached with slow, respectful steps. In his hands he carried the folded flag that had lain across Michael's casket. He knelt before her. "Ma'am, General Whitaker requested you receive this." He placed the flag gently in her lap. Tucked between the folds there was a small white envelope. Her name written in shaky, familiar handwriting, Mama Hattie. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. Inside, a simple note. No fanfare. Just words that broke her heart open all over again. "Mama Hattie, thank you for giving me a home when I had none. I love you, Michael." She pressed the note to her lips and closed her eyes. And in that moment, the pain, the years, the silence, all of it melted into peace. She had come to say goodbye, but instead, she was finally seen as the mother she'd always been. The images from that day, the elderly black grandmother standing at the gates of Arlington, the four-star general kneeling before her, spread like wildfire across social media and news networks. Thousands of voices rose up, writing letters, sharing messages, and sending apologies for the way she was treated. The story of Hattie Mae Johnson touched hearts across the nation. For once an invisible woman was seen. She returned home not in shame, but wrapped in honor. Months later, an official ceremony brought her back to the military base. This time, not as a bystander, but as a respected guest. They pinned a medal on her chest, an official military commendation for her lifetime of sacrifice and love. Standing there with tears in her eyes, Hattie spoke softly but clearly. "I didn't need a medal, I just needed to know." He remembered. Her story reminds us all that family isn't just about blood or rank. It's about love, sacrifice, and the quiet strength of those who lift us up when the world turns away. If this story moved you, take a moment to reflect on the invisible heroes in your own life. Like, share, and subscribe to Silentshift Stories to hear more real stories that challenge us to see beyond the surface. And remember, sometimes the greatest acts of courage happen quietly, in the shadows, in the heart.